the Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Today's edition of the Spot Track Podcast is presented by Bettor Edge. If you dabble in sports betting like we do here at Spot Track, you're probably looking for something a little bit more in your pocket. A brand that you can trust, odds you can set, and an edge that you have been craving. Bettor Edge is that platform, the social betting marketplace that gives users all across the country the chance to win more every time you bet by creating your price without the juice. Visit bettoredge.com. That's BETTOREDGE.com today. Use code SPOTTRACK for $20 on the house as soon as you sign up and get that Apple app in the iOS store today. That's bettoredge.com. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, May 5th. Back from a bit of a hiatus, but bigger and better than ever, to take the Mike Greenberg phrase. We're going to go old school on this podcast. So there's a million things to get to. Some contracts that have hit in the NFL. Obviously, some big news in the NBA and some speculation about where things are headed over the next couple of months. We got plenty of time for that and plenty of people to do the dirty work on that as well. But I'm going to take 5 NFL players that I think are headed or percolating or stewing or brimming towards another NFL contract. And some of them haven't really been talked about in that vein. I sort of teased this with a social media poll this morning before I hit the record button, and kind of used it as a backboard to get some mailbag information back from the fans, from the beats, and all the people, great people that follow us here at Spot Track. So I've got 5 names, and I'm going to dive as deep as I possibly can on an audio platform in terms of where they currently sit and where they may be headed over the next couple of weeks, months, possibly this time next offseason with a couple of the names. But I would like to speculate that now may be a little bit better, because if you follow this thing and you follow the NFL money, it's moving faster than a freight train. So without further ado, in no particular order, by the way, let's get to the list of 5 serious NFL extension candidates for one reason or another, starting with the running back. And I don't think we're here if not for Saquon Barkley, something we've heard quite a bit over the past 18 months. It's deserved. Is the turnover now into these other names and these other contracts worthy? I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. You know, we had a great 2024 campaign financially, productively, eye test, everything we needed. It was a phenomenal draft at this position. And obviously the payback on that is TBD, but we're running out of time to give Derrick Henry his due. So we're going to do it right now, because he is an all-pro running back on every accord. He's I think, first ballot Hall of Famer. I don't know why he would be eluded of that, but certainly the numbers are there. The longevity is there. And now there's some playoff winning to go with that as well, though certainly not to the finish line. He's also 31 and a half years old. And by the time the season starts, he'll be approaching 32. And for any other human being at this position, it would be a deal breaker. I mean, we wouldn't even be approaching this conversation, let alone salivating to have it. But we're here because this guy's the unicorn. And there's no other phrase to be used. He is passed every test. He has been good stat, bad team guy. He's been good stat, good team guy. He's been good stat with great quarterback, great rushing quarterback stat guy. He's now kind of checked every box. And he's about to head into 2025 on a 1-year, $7 million deal with incentives that can add $2.5 million to that. $2 million of that's likely, let's put it that way. And by the way, is likely on the cap for Baltimore in 2025, because he approached and achieved all of these markers, which is 1,200 rush yards, 1,500 rush yards, 13 touchdowns, and 15 touchdowns. Those exist for 2025 as well. They're considered likely. And the only one he didn't hit last year was 1,000 rushing yards and a Super Bowl win. Much easier said than done on that one. So that's the deal. It's a $7 million base salary. He's already seen one of that in the form of a roster bonus in March. And he can max this out at $9.5 million, all inclusive for 2025. For every other 31.5-year-old running back, maybe in the history of the NFL, this would be just fine. But it's just not. And it's just not. Barkley's not 31. And the Barkley re-up was for cap as much as it was for cash and marketing and good faith. Let's be honest about how the Eagles operate. And Baltimore's a very different monster in every financial respect. They don't do the pot sweetener. Okay. They let all pro left tackles approach free agency with days to go before signing Ronnie Stanley to his re-up three-year contract. They let Lamar Jackson get dragged through the social media weeds in terms of trades and offer sheets and the world before he self-represents himself into a phenomenal 5-year contract. And oh, by the way, we'll get to him in a second. So now we're at Derrick Henry, a weapon that, for all intents, by the way, don't usually get paid in Baltimore. They've been generous to tight ends, and rightfully so in the past. And it looks like they're going to be generous with Mark Andrews for one more year here. But they generally don't do this, which is just hand out extra money to somebody who, despite the fact that he's done everything on the field to be worthy of it, just simply doesn't require it. And yet I think we're going to get there. I think the pressure from the NFL, from multiple other franchises, Buffalo with Josh Allen, Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes, the Rams with this Hopkins contract. We've seen it now over and over. And it's not just an overpay. It's a targeted, we're doing this for a reason. And we're going to say it out loud without saying it out loud. This player has proven more in the past than he has been paid for in the past. And we're going to right that ship right now. A, because we can afford it, because we're billionaires. B, because it's not going to impact our cap in any regard enough to damage our ability to contend in 2025. And C, because it's going to look really damn good. And that's the part that the NFL has been missing for a bunch of years now, at least widespread. And I do feel like we're catching up to that. And again, a lot of this is smoke and mirrors. A lot of this is, we're going to make it sound like it's a good faith gesture, but really we're just handing this guy a couple extra mil to save cap this year, to save cap next year, to be able to squeeze in a draft pick here, yada, yada, yada. And that's not what this would be. Okay. It's just not. Would Baltimore save some cap space by extending Derrick Henry? Absolutely. Number one, you'd be turning that $6 million base salary he has into some form of a signing bonus. You could drop him down to a minimum 1.25 salary. So right there, with the use of void years, you're saving millions, $3 to $4 million. You could also restructure these incentives a little bit to make them not likely by adding 1 yard to every one of these thresholds, essentially. Okay. And going from there to take that $2 million off the cap and still make them highly achievable for Derrick Henry going forward. You add some sort of team stat, right? Like Baltimore's got to improve in their interception rate in 2025 in order for Derrick Henry to hit his rushing yard and touchdown thresholds. And all of a sudden, that's a not likely to be earned stat. $2 million comes off the cap. It's pretty easy stuff and pretty standard stuff. We see it by the dozens throughout the course of March and April and May and June on an annual basis. So doable, and Baltimore would benefit. They've already signed their draft class, so they're certainly not worried about the cap in that regard, but everybody's got to worry about the cap as we approach September and the top 51 moniker goes away and we get down to the nitty gritty. And oh, by the way, everybody's worrying about the cap as we roll it into 2026 and we think about how we're going to treat the next offseason. So this is a long-term conversation that we're having in the short term. Is Derrick Henry worthy of this? Yes. Will Baltimore do this? I can't say yes. Should Baltimore do this? I believe the answer is yes. And the reason I'm saying yes isn't that I think Baltimore has been cheap and thrifty and built non-competitive rosters because of that moniker. But I believe that it goes a long way as we've seen in Philly, as we've seen with the Rams, who have been guaranteeing future salary that they know they're going to end up buying out anyway to save a little cap today and to have a good faith gesture going forward later. We've seen teams like this operate year on and year on and year on and build up some stamina with it and some juice and some brownie points. And it does matter. And to say that they have Lamar Jackson and a decade of winning records and that should be all they need is fair. Who am I to say that they need to pay a running back an extra $5 or $6 million to add brownie points to what is seemingly an impeccable resume? But it counts and it helps. And it helps in the negotiations of things like Kyle Hamilton and Ronnie Stanley and these bona fide locked in core players that you're trying to lock in with as much team friendliness as humanly possible. Something I think the Bills have done a phenomenal job of. Something I think to a certain degree, San Francisco, who has kept their foot down in a lot of instances, has done a phenomenal job of. So are you trying to steer in that direction? You know, Detroit, I think, has had a win here over the past couple of off seasons as they've gotten good quickly. Are you trying to steer in that direction? Or are you trying to be the rich man's Cincinnati Bengals, which is how I sort of classify this team? Yes, they pay, and they pay good money, and they do add to free agency, and they do draft heavy, and they do compensate properly. But it feels like it's always one step behind, where many of the good teams with longevity continue to be a step ahead. Well, this would be one of those instances, and it's a small one, both financially and on the resume. It's one of those instances where they can just suck it up and do it and add it to their resume and go forward. So what do the numbers look like? I've been rambling here because that's how this is going to work. I'm going to give you the current situation, some quick thoughts, some quick numbers, and we'll move on to our next candidate. I told you it's 1 for 7. It can get to 1 for 9.5. That's the base current contract right now. All it has to look like, and this is a significant jump, is if you believe that Derrick Henry can be Derrick Henry through 2025 and in 2026, then you simply just match what the rest of the league has been doing, which is you take 1 for 7, you rip it up, and you make it 2 for 36. You put him on 18 a year, which is where he should have been in the first place, by the way. And you guarantee almost 20 million of that, because that's the percent you guaranteed on his original contract, which was 2 for 16. The cap has spiked. The cash has spiked. The minimum salaries have spiked. Everything about this league has gone up. Saquon Barkley has now dragged the running backs, I guess, air quote, hypothetically, into the 20 million per year mark. And we have some significant contracts now in the books. Is this back pay? It's not. This is actually mathematically what our algorithm says Derrick Henry is worth. 18 million a year at 31 and a half years old. So pay him it. Are you actually paying him 36 million? Of course not. Okay. Can you incentive base 20% of this? Probably. And make him prove that he can still go out there and get to those kind of numbers. It's a big jump up. But that's the number. This is what it would take. A 1 for 20 that's built into a 2 for 36. Okay. And you can make 17 million of that this year, and you can make the remainder of that next year if you want in 19 million. Half of that guaranteed. And if you need to buy him out or trade him on that price, you do it. But I think this is what it would take as a stepping stone for this organization to steer a little bit away from that Bengals stink and a little bit more towards that Eagles smell, which is, for obvious reasons, about as strong as it's been coming out of Philadelphia on the heels of the Super Bowl. Let's stick with Baltimore, because they've been saying out loud before we even got to it that Lamar Jackson probably needs a new contract. And there's a couple of reasons this is happening. But the big one, I think, is exactly the conversation we're having here around this organization, which is, all right, we kind of got bullyballed into a corner because we waited, because we let the franchise tag and social media and trade requests and all these other things that came the last time around happen. And we got backed into a corner, a la Dak Prescott twice with Jerry Jones and every other massive Dallas Cowboys contract that we've been talking about. And there's got to be a world where Baltimore just simply doesn't want to go down that path again. So despite the fact that we have 3 years and $147.5 million remaining on this contract, the reason that Lamar and his camp and Baltimore and their camp are starting this conversation today is that, yes, all of the $43.5 million for 2025 is guaranteed. That vested last year, as you might expect. And just over half of next year's $52 million fully guaranteed this past March. So for all intents, we're talking about $72.5 million fully guaranteed right now of the 147.5. But the problem is there's no more triggers. There's no more on this date, X amount more guarantees. We're done. The triggers in the contract are over as of March 2025. So this is generally the time when an agent, which Lamar still does not have, starts to come forward, in calculated measures and say, all right, let's start to have the conversation because my guy's out of options here. He's out of vests. He's out of triggers. The contract is fluffy from here out. And we want to rectify that because he probably should have won another MVP. And the stats continue to explode off the page. And he is not the reason that we're not hoisting a Super Bowl trophy right now. So 1 + 1 + 1 gives us all the traction we need to start this conversation 3 years early. So here we are. The math is ridiculous, as you might imagine, when talking about Lamar Jackson. There are still people on the socials. I think just yesterday I saw a couple big threads making the case that Lamar just had the best season he's ever had. And if not for everything that came with Josh Allen's 2024 campaign that, brought him to the MVP, Lamar would have won it 10 out of 10 times. And the numbers always stand out. So when you pump him into our algorithm, and there's a bunch of ways to do this because the age is still right. He's still running at a very high rate. Again, we use a 2-year window here in terms of our statistics, but everything about Lamar Jackson is still Lamar Jackson, despite the fact that we're now talking about 28-year-old Lamar and not a fresh 23 or 24-year-old player heading towards that second contract. Mathematically speaking, we're talking about a $68 million APY, which is a significant jump up from the $52 million that he's been playing on for the past couple of seasons that he negotiated himself before the 2023 season. It's obviously the biggest valuation we've ever pumped out at SpotTrack at this sport. And I can tell you right now, it could be higher. Okay. If I included the other players that are in this ballpark, like Trevor Lawrence, like Jordan Love, like Tua, who are high paid, somewhat mobile quarterbacks. Tua not so much, obviously, in his current standing. But if we included those players and all of the numbers that come with them, he's over 70 million, mathematically speaking, without us having to do any more massaging. So, the time to talk about the contract is today because we're about to exceed 300 million in league salary cap next year. We go to 320, 325 thereafter. And then we're talking about an expiring contract for Lamar Jackson with a cap that could be 350 in 2027, 28. So, percent of cap wise, guarantee wise, fill in the blanks from other quarterbacks wise, you can understand why the Ravens have already said out loud, hey, we should probably talk about this. All right. Because 68, and let's say it falls into 65 or 64, is going to be a veritable value in 2 years if the financials of the NFL keep up. And of course they will. So we're not talking about extending this out because that Lamar Jackson has no reason to do this. We're talking about exactly what happened with Josh Allen and the Bills, which is Josh Allen had 4 years left. We're ripping him up. We're starting over from peg one, square A. And Josh Allen's going to have a brand new spanking $55 million per year, $250 million guaranteed contract. So we're starting in 2025. We're running through 2029. That means Lamar Jackson is just approaching 34 years old at the end of that contract, which means you start talking about a re-up for contract 4 at age 32, 33. Still crazy good years for him to be negotiating. So 5 years, $340 million, and of that, $275 million is practically guaranteed, which is the 75% that both Allen and he received last time around. It's huge. It's massive. But the time is now, because we're only getting closer to the Jaden Daniels conversation and potentially the Caleb Williams conversation. We'll talk about some of those future quarterbacks in just a second here. But massive numbers and some insight as to why we're starting to hear, at least early on, that the Lamar stuff probably needs to happen sooner rather than later. Let's flip to the defensive side of the ball quickly. Trey Hendrickson's the name that will not go away because it's an expiring contract. He's the sack leader. He is polarizingly 30 years old, 29 years old. And he's the third cog in this Bengals contract wheel for 2025. And 2 of those cogs have been paid. Hendrickson, by the way, 30 and a half years old right now. Getting some wires crossed here. Jamar Chase, paid, maxed out. T. Higgins, in terms of WR2s or 1Bs, maxed out. And mathematically paid exactly where he belongs. In other words, the Bengals have come through twice exactly where they needed to be from a price point. The problem with the Hendrickson situation is that at this age, we now have a fork in the road. We have, even recently, even literally last week, 29 to 30-year-old edge rushers with tons of production that are getting pot sweeteners. So Danielle Hunter in Houston got a 1 for 35 and a half sweetener tacked on to what was already a pretty nice deal in free agency last year. And now Andrew Van Ginkel in Minnesota got a 1 for 23 sweetener tacked on to a nice 2-year free agent contract that he signed last year as those players sort of flip roles. We have that path, and we've had that path kind of consistently, not to this degree, but obviously the money's going to funnel up. You know, Khalil Mack continues to get really well paid at 34, 35 years old, despite the fact that, you know, for a long time, that was just an absolute no-no, a red flag. So we're seeing that fork, which is really nice money as a layer on top of a contract or an expiring contract. And you have to imagine that's exactly the route that the Bengals have been trying to go with Hendrickson, even probably this time last year when they did a bit of a sweetener, like a basically let's pull some cash forward sweetener. No incentives, no nothing. If that's the case, I can tell you right now that the Hunter contract is just the route to go. Right? The 1 for 35. But there's no way he's taking this, because he's been through the ringer now 2 off seasons in a row. He and his agent definitely know that the trade offers are still there and that the Bengals do have a way out where they can still sort of win at the end of this game. So if that's the route the Bengals have to go, we'll get to a projection in a second here. We'll see. But the other fork in the road, obviously, is Myles Garrett. Okay. And I think there are people out there that don't want to classify Hendrickson and Myles Garrett in the same boat. And maybe from an overall resume, that's fair, but there's just too much now attached to Hendrickson to just throw that out, in my opinion. Myles Garrett was 29 years old heading into this offseason. He demanded the trade. Cleveland was a bit of a mess. Money talked. Was it an overpay? For sure. No question. But were we getting to the $40 million mark anyway with defensive players? Of course. All right. And Cincinnati just got there with the wide receivers. So a lot of things happening here that are kind of crossing up. So Myles Garrett is the other fork in this road at 4 years, 160 with $123 million guaranteed at 1 year younger than Hendrickson currently lives. Does he belong in the middle of this conversation? Yes. And that's probably what's making this so complicated, because there's a world where he's looking for a 3-year extension. Okay. 2 of which is massively guaranteed. Something Cincinnati doesn't love to do either, by the way. So a 3-year extension in the high 30s. All right. So let's say we take that Danielle Hunter number and we tack on 3 years. We're talking almost $110 million tacked on to the 1 year, $16 million he has left. And that 4 for 116, brings us around $30 million a year on an adjusted APY. It's good money. It's great money. Is it red flag money for other teams? I don't think so. Because a 2-year guarantee on that is 2 for 60, which mathematically I can tell you he's a 2 for 63 in our system. So we bring in all these other factors, the pot sweeteners, the Myles Garrett blockbuster, our algorithm itself, and what the Bengals have already done with Chase and Higgins, which matters. It's foot in the sand stuff. And we just get to this. If the Bengals don't want to go term, then they're going to have to break all of the other trends and all of the other structures that they generally do. And they're going to have to put Hendrickson into that Burrow Chase conversation, which is we're going to give him the term that he's looking for. We're going to simplify things, and we're going to use void years to our advantage, something we hate to do, we never do. And in return, we're going to have massive per game roster bonuses like we did with T. Higgins, right? In the millions, 1.5 million, maybe 1.75 million. So that at some point in time, if the wheels fall off from an injury standpoint, we can start to recoup some of this cash and cap over time. I think it's probably the compromise that everybody seeks. So is this 2 for 70? Is it 3 for 100? Is that enough? And can we fully guarantee those first 2 years at 35, 36 million per year? I get it. This is a tough one. And trading him March 14th might have been the easiest approach for them and trying to find his replacement in the draft this past April, but it didn't go that way. So now that we have that in the blinders, it's all about money. Okay. And you're probably one step higher in terms of where that money has to fall than you were even 6 weeks ago before the draft, before you had a little bit more leverage with replacing him this offseason. We'll see. 2 for 70 fully guaranteed, maybe 3 for 100. 75% of that guaranteed probably gets it done with some compromising per game roster bonuses to backload things a little bit here. 2 more players. You ready? Terry McLaurin, wide receiver for the Washington Commanders, a team that has been uberly aggressive, as you might imagine, having hit lightning in a bottle with Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels cannot be paid for 2 more seasons. That's through 2026, after 2026, I should say, which gives them even more carte blanche with some of these situations. And McLaurin's heading into an expiring contract here, 1 for just under $20 million. 2.8 million of that's already been vested in a roster bonus. So there's some wiggle room with a bit of the other salary. And the sky has only gotten bluer from McLaurin. A, because Deebo Samuel's on board now. B, because there's some young talent to go around him. And obviously with the infusion of Jaden Daniels. But this front office has been calculatedly smart. Yes, they've been aggressive. Yes, there's going to be some swings and misses from this past offseason, but I don't think it'll be to the degree of what we saw Houston go through last year when CJ Stroud regressed. The weapons got injured left and right, as they kind of have been for the past couple seasons, and they are now in offensive line / weapon rebuilding mode to some degree in Houston, something that you don't want to see Washington get into in the valuable years of Jaden Daniels. So what's appropriate? Well, for certain, getting McLaurin on an extension right now is appropriate. You don't want to get into a franchise tag situation with him. There's a clear fit between him and Daniels. He's not the alpha type player that when you bring in this other infusion of talent like a Deebo, there's going to be ripples and backlogs and all sorts of things that could go with this. everything makes sense. And in fact, what I've kind of tagged him here as my notes is he's a younger, healthier Chris Godwin. And by no means do I mean that McLaurin is a WR2 or a 1B. He's just simply an egoless WR1. All right. And a maximum talent player. Godwin took a bath this offseason, and I get it. Back-to-back injuries, the comeback of Mike Evans, and how this whole Buccaneers situation has sort of been constructed was attractive. The family didn't want to leave Tampa Bay, but there's no question that he left probably about $10 million in total on the table by not totally pursuing free agency and returning at what ended up being 3 years, $66 million, $44 million guaranteed. So we can't have McLaurin going that route. A, because he's not there yet in terms of free agency. And B, because he's much more of an alpha player on the field than Chris Godwin has ever been. To me, the number is this. It's not so much about the APY because they're kind of all over the place right now with the explosion of wide receiver contracts we've had over the past 3 off seasons, culminating, of course, this year with Chase. It's not about going up and trying to get to the top of that mountain because there's just no way that the Washington Commanders in their current iteration are looking for that type of scenario with any of their players, let alone, an somewhat aging Terry McLaurin, who, not that he can be easily replaced, but they would probably be willing to replace him in next year's draft at a turn if this negotiation goes wrong. So he's got to be kind of careful with how he steps into this water because the Commanders, for the first time in a long time, have front office leverage. To me, it's about securing a guarantee APY that he's happy with. What can I secure myself over the next 2.5 seasons? Let's get to 3 and put this back on the player a little bit. Let's say 3 seasons. What is the APY that I'm looking for over those 3 seasons that I'm comfortable with heading towards what could be, I guess, hypothetically, my last big extension, right? I think that's fair. He's not a dinosaur. He's 29. He will be 30 by the time this season starts. Okay. So if we get 3 fully guaranteed years, we're talking about a 33-year-old Terry McLaurin. It's not likely that he's cashing in on a huge multi-year guarantee at that point in time. So it's now or never in that regard. So is it 30? Is it 3 for 90 on a base practical value that he requires? Because I can tell you right now that the math itself says it's slightly more than that. 3 for 95-ish, 94-ish. So if he comes down at that 3 for 90 and we wrap this thing into a 4 for 140, all right, something that looks great on paper, something that looks great from an APY standpoint as an overall contract, but it's a 3 for 90 when it comes down to the guts, and there's some incentives built in there with playoffs and playing time and whatnot that can maybe get him a tad higher, like we've seen with Evans and some of these other teams. I think everybody's happy because we're not near the top of the market, but we are explosively higher than where we were, Terry McLaurin, right? Because on my last extension, we're talking 3 for 68 and 53 of that practically guaranteed. So can we go 4 for 140, but 90 million of it has a practical guarantee? Because that's just where wide receivers are now. The whole thing has come up, the guarantee structure, the percents, and obviously the APYs have come way up. So they don't have a lot of veterans locked in on a multi-year standard. And that's clearly been their pattern in Washington is, look, we believe that we can turn this thing over every couple of years at most of these positions, even the primary ones. And because Jaden, we think, is going to be a guy, the alpha, a lot of other things should fall into place and we should be able to benefit accordingly. I just don't think with this guy specifically, because of his track record, because of what he's been through, and now what he did in year 1 of Jaden, do you want to dangle with this one too much? So it's an overpay slightly, but on a 3 for 90 for a wide receiver in the grand scheme of things where the salary cap is going, I think everybody should be able to live with that one. We'll see if that becomes a topic of conversation over the next couple of weeks here. And finally, back to the quarterbacks. Haven't heard a lick about this one, except for me, kind of constantly hammering this one home, both here on this podcast and in some of the Florida markets themselves on the radio hits. But I think Baker Mayfield should be getting a contract right now. And I think it's the Buccaneers that should be proactively doing it. And I'm going to bring this back full circle because they have been kind of living on house run it back money for a while now. Now, there's a whole side of this that says that they should be going extra careful with Baker for two reasons. One, it's been a 2 good year run. Can they actually expect a third where he's a top 5 quarterback, where he maxes out his incentives, where everything about this guy looks like the actual number 1 overall pick that he was brought in this league to be? Well, most quarterbacks don't need 3 years to get max paid in this league. Let's just put it that way. Brock Purdy is about to be near max paid, and he doesn't have 3 good years. He doesn't. From injuries, from other players playing, etc. But also, a lot of the other parts of this Buccaneers roster are probably about to get ripped down, including, Mike Evans retiring and Cade Otton and some of these other things that you don't know. Now they've got a good deal on Godwin for 2 years. They've got a great deal on Tristan Wirfs, in my opinion. They did pay some interior linemen this offseason. They did pay Antoine Winfield on a contract that they hope doesn't look like a burden over the next couple of seasons. But for the most part, they've got defensive lines to replenish, and certainly off-ball linebackers to replenish, and some of these weapons. And that's expensive. Those are primary expensive positions. So should they get ahead of Baker now, risking the fact that maybe his 2-year run was just a blip on the radar that required Mike Evans to be at a very high level, which he might not be able to be anymore? Or do they let themselves reconstruct this roster heavily, both in 2026 and maybe 1 year after, try to get themselves back into division contention, and then sort of worry about Baker Mayfield? Because there's 2 years, $70 million left. With incentives, that's actually 2 for $80, which is a $40 million APY. He's fully guaranteed in 2025 now at $30 million. He did max out those incentives last year, $5 million annually. So they could sit here and do nothing, which by all accounts is what they've done. And let Baker Mayfield play out $30 million, and we'll see on the incentives, and then have this exact conversation next offseason. The problem with doing that is everything I've already just said. They may be sitting there now with an expiring Baker contract, who could again be a top 5, top 8 quarterback in this league, both statistically from PFF, the world, and a maxed incentive package, and have to replenish the defensive line and the right side of the offensive line and a WR1, right? And the off-ball linebackers and a cornerback and one of the safeties and all these things that we're kind of looking ahead to next offseason. So do you want to be having all of those conversations and the Baker conversation, or do you want to just get Baker done right now? Because you know what you see inside that room. You're hoping that, the loss of Liam Cohen isn't going to be catastrophic to Baker. But from a staggering standpoint, doing this contract right now makes the most sense. It's complicated because we've seen Darnold's contract become fuzzy and kind of work in Seattle's favor. I think to some degree, Geno Smith, both in Seattle and now in Vegas, has proved that this resuscitated quarterback career isn't exactly maxing out financially. So if I sit here and tell you that mathematically, Baker Mayfield's a max contract, okay? He's a mathematical $60 million APY, and that he is much, much closer to is Dak elite than is Sam Darnold actually a QB1. That's what all the production says about Baker Mayfield over the past 2.5 seasons, is that he is closer to Dak Prescott than he is Sam Darnold. And the math comes with me in that conversation. Now, would Baker Mayfield take less to remain the Tampa Bay quarterback? He's done it once. He went on basically a 1 for 40 last year, maxed it out, and now he's on a 1 for 30. So if he takes this, let's finish with this. If they ask him to play out 2025, now he's played out $30 million. he's done you a huge favor as being one of the cheapest, legitimate top starting quarterbacks in all of football. And that now includes Sam Darnold and Geno Smith. Okay. Now he's done you a huge favor. And that's going to be factored into the negotiations next March when, oh, by the way, you're trying to rebuild a lot of this roster along with it. So again, there's a lot of reasons to wait if you're Tampa Bay. There might be more reasons to sign Baker Mayfield right now. So what does that look like? He's got 2 years, 70 left. I'm adding 3 for 180 to that. So this is a true 5-year total contract. And I'm guaranteeing 125. Okay, so that's 180 plus the 70. That's 250. And I'm guaranteeing exactly half of that contract, which is the concession for Baker Mayfield stumbling through the first 5 years of his career, hopefully finding some sort of new life over the course of the past 3 years, and now getting a contract that supplants him as a multi-year, locked in stone, guaranteed QB1 for this organization, which will guarantee him 125. But if things had gone properly, that's probably closer to 200 million. It's just a fact. I mean, that's what we're talking about for the Lamars and for some of these uber elite tier contracts. So it's 3 new years, 180 million new money, and 125 of the total value of the contract practically guaranteed at signing. That's the deal. That's I think what it would take to make Baker Mayfield say yes and to get ahead of this conversation, not for other quarterback contracts' sake, but for their own roster construction's sake. Get this one done today so that tomorrow and next March look a little bit easier on your palate, assuming, of course, that Baker Mayfield is and remains a top quarterback in this league. And quickly, just to finish on this, because it's kind of a nice takeaway for a lot of the conversations we've been having. We're about to go into a bit of a quarterback contract lull. And will we have some pot sweeteners here and there? Maybe. But I did some real work on this over my cup of coffee this morning. And I'm forcing Baker into this conversation here. Lamar's here because the Baltimore Ravens told us he should be here. But if we just quickly start to look ahead over the course of the next few months, Brock Purdy's going to get done here relatively soon, probably maybe not too closer to camp, but relatively soon. So that's a done deal. Lamar probably over the course of the next few months. He waited quite a while last time around. And then we start looking ahead to next year. CJ Stroud's a probably, likely, I'll put him in the likely tier. He's the only player I have in the likely tier. Now I'll add Baker to that. Okay, so let's say Brock Purdy and Lamar Jackson likely this offseason. CJ Stroud, Baker Mayfield likely next offseason, just because of the way things seem to be playing out. And then we got possiblies. And here are the only possiblies that I could find. Bryce Young. I guess I'm being generous. Jalen Hurts, okay, who will have 3 years left, but we know how Philly operates. And then possibly Sam Darnold, possibly. I mean, that probably deserves its own tier. But if he's a banger in Seattle, we're right back in this Baker Mayfield conversation with the Seahawks, because that was a one and we'll see with 2 years of decent 1 year vesting guarantees. Darnold and his camp may look around and say, great, now they've got Jalen Milroe on that roster. So there's some leverage that they've added to their playbook there. But he's at least a conversation piece as to a quarterback who may need a new contract over the course of the next 12 to 18 months if things go spectacular over the next season. That's it. I don't have another name for you. I just don't. The 2022 draft was a complete bust in terms of quarterbacks not named Brock Purdy, the last pick in that draft. The 2023 draft is not looking good, okay, for when this eligibility comes up after the current season. Stroud's almost definite, and Bryce Young's a no right now. He's just a no for a 2026 extension. He's not a no for forever, but he's a no for next offseason as of today. And outside of that, we're just pulling strings at players who might need re-ups, like a Jalen Hurts. So we won't have a lot of pressure from young quarterbacks resetting this market like we've had year over year over year for the better part of 5 off seasons here. So it's just kind of a word of warning as we finish here after this drawn out episode, that this position alone is going to need some creativity, like we saw with Josh Allen this year. And I think we're about to see with Lamar, to sort of continue to really push the envelope like it's been doing year over year. Because I just don't think we'll have the talent. Now, following 2026, we've got a Jaden conversation and maybe a Caleb Williams conversation as well, along with, JJ and Bo Nix and Penix and a ton of candidates. But for right now, we're headed toward a little bit of a lull, and I'm interested to see what that does to the rest of the league positionally, if teams reallocate or they just simply hold back and understand that they've got a bit of a breather here for a couple of off seasons in that regard. Visit bettoredge.com. Use code SPOTTRACK. Get yourself $20 off on sign up today. That's bettoredge.com. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spot Track Podcast.